We all know very well that Parah Adumah is the one mitzvah that is completely beyond anything rational. Nobody could ever understand it. In fact, even Shlomo HaMelech, who was the wisest person, said, "Amarti achakma, I thought I would be able to work it out. V'rechoy mimen, it's completely beyond me." And yet, on the other hand, we find that the Eibishter reveals to Moshe Rabbeinu, "L'cha ani megalatam parah." To you, I'm going to explain the reason behind the Parah Adumah. So we need to understand why is it so important that there's this element of Judaism that is completely super rational. If Hashem could explain it to Moshe, why doesn't he explain it to everybody? Except for the fact that we need an element of Judaism, so it's Chukas HaTorah. We need something that is so inexplicable to remind us that fundamentally the whole of Torah is beyond our grasp. And what Hashem has allowed us to understand is only really scratching the surface, which of course then raises the question in the other direction, so how come Hashem revealed it to Moshe Rabbeinu? And that's going to take us into the secret of Tumas Meis, this idea of a disconnection between body and soul, which is so objectionable that Moshe Rabbeinu said, how could we ever get around it? And so that's the greatness of Torah, is that it shows the impact of the neshama even on a body after the neshama is no longer directly connected with the body. And that is the secret of Parah Adumah. The Medrash tells us on the pasuk opening of this week's parasha that this is the choik, the inexplicable law of Torah. There are 4 things that the Yetzer Hara could challenge and say these are completely irrational. Each of which the Torah describes with the word chukah. One is eishes ach, that you're not allowed to marry the woman who was married to your brother, but there is such a thing as yibum. V'kilayim, that you may not mix wool and linen, yet you may do so for tzitzis, and also in the Bigdei Kuhuna. Us'ira mishtaleach, here's a goat that he sent on Yom Kippur to atone for the entire community, except the person who processes it becomes impure. Parah Adumah, that has a similar theme. It atones and purifies somebody who was contaminated by a dead body, but the practitioner, the Kohen, becomes impure himself. In each case we find things that are irrational, not just irrational because they make no sense, but because they're beyond sense. And it plays out in the fact that they have contradictory laws, as we've just seen. Von dem Ober, was Schleimer hat gesagt, al kol elamati, of Parasha Parah Adumah chalkalti v'shalti v'shfashti, of mati achakim yivrechoikim mimeni. Yet the fact that Shlomo HaMelech doesn't say it about any of the other 4, only about Parah Adumah, that this is the one that I tried and I examined and I researched and I thought I would understand it, and yet it is beyond me. As no die Parasha from Parah Adumah hat nicht gekent massig sein, that Parah Adumah is the only one he couldn't decode, is muchach as der ikinyan a chukah was is nicht api seichel, chukah chokakte gezer gozartis by Parah Adumah dafka. That illustrates that the primary concept of a choik, something which is the Eibishter's decree, you have to accept it even though you cannot begin to understand it, is specific to Parah Adumah. So the fact that the uniqueness of the super rational element of Parah Adumah is distinct from any other one of the mitzvahs that have no logical basis. It's verstandig, was bei Parah Adumah steht, Chukas HaTorah, was der Teit Kipshute is Zeus, das is nicht kein andere, is die Chukah in the Torah. So if this is the unique choik that is so completely beyond anything that the human mind could grasp, even Shlomo HaMelech's mind, then we understand why it's introduced not as Chukas HaPorah, the unique law of Parah Adumah, but Chukas HaTorah. So it has a bearing on the whole of Torah. Das heißt, as a mitis in a Chukah von Torah. Was is the Gamnit Beged is by Parah Adumah, which indicates that the ultimate goal of the whole of Chukas HaTorah, anything within Torah that should be super rational, will all be expressed dafka in Parah Adumah. So if that's true, and this is the ultimate state of choik, the ultimate state of a piece of Judaism that is completely beyond the rational, then we have to understand a different medrash which tells us that the Eibishter says to Moshe Rabbeinu, to you I will reveal the secret behind the Parah Adumah. Was von dem ist auch muchach chukas haParah hatatan. So that indicates that there is actually a reason. We wanted to say Chukas HaPorah, that this is not just a unique element of Judaism that doesn't make sense, but it's Chukas HaTorah. It is the ultimate state of a Torah expression which is beyond human rationale, and yet there must be a reason, because Hashem says, I'll tell you the reason. So that raises 2 questions. Number 1, Aleph, if there is a hidden reason behind the Parah Adumah, why could Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest person on earth, not decode it? Und Beis, was hat Moshe Rabbeinu nicht Megale gewinnt dem Tam zu Aliden, also wie hat es getan mit Pilpul der Reise. And secondly, if Moshe Rabbeinu was given the secret, why didn't he share it with everyone else? There are so many other areas of Torah where he did reveal to us things that Hashem had told him, so to speak, privately. As David hat das gegeben not zu Moshe, von deswegen noag ba Tovas ayin, und hat das gegeben in Israel. We see that there are many elements of Torah, like the real nuances and insight of Torah. There's certain things that Hashem gave only to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he was very generous and he shared it with everybody else. How come now, suddenly, when it comes to Parah Adumah, he doesn't share it? So how is it that there is a reason to Parah Adumah? How is it that Shlomo HaMelech didn't access that reason? How is it that Moshe Rabbeinu kept it to himself? Darf man sagen, so therefore we have no choice but to conclude, as Menias Hagila is nicht given to them, was Moshe hat es nicht gewollt megale sein. So you have to conclude that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't being stingy or cagey about it, playing his cards close to his heart, and I'm not going to reveal this, then you'll see how special I am. It's none of that kind of thing. Oder weil der Eibishter hat ihm nicht geheißen. It's not even because Hashem told him that you may not share this information. What's the reason? Not to them, was der Tam von Parah Adumah is nicht begeder hasoga und seichel von Anivra. The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't share it with the Yidden is because it was impossible to share with the Yidden, because it's not something that a created intellect would be able to grasp. It was completely beyond anything, not only human intellect, created intellect should be able to understand. Say Moshe Rabbeinu wollte es megale gewinnt zu Eden. So if Moshe would have revealed what he knew to the Yidden, so what would have happened? Wollten sie dem Tam nicht gekannt verstehen. They would have had the information and it would have meant nothing to them. They would have been completely incapable of understanding the information that he would have given them. Which means that they couldn't be mekabels and they couldn't actually absorb the information. Like the Eibishter himself told Moshe Rabbeinu about the process of the purification of Parah Adumah. This is a decree that I have made. No created being can begin to grasp it. So it's not that Moshe withheld it. It's not that the Eibishter withheld it. We are not wired with the capacity to be able to absorb this insight. Und der Rebbe hat euch Shlomo b'chachmas nicht gekannt massig sein dem Tam von Parah Adumah hier many. That's why Shlomo HaMelech, as great as his intellect was, it is the intellect of a created human, so it's incapable of grasping and capturing this information. Und auch viele Moshe Rabbeinu, was es gewinnt, Shleimus min ha'enushi, hat es bekechatzmen nicht gekannt massig sein, warum das in begeder seich von Anivra. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the ultimate human being, didn't get of his own accord, through his own efforts, to understand the story of Parah Adumah. It's beyond him. Not the Eibishter, welches kol yochel, farim seine nitoken shemagbolos, just that the Eibishter doesn't have any limitations. The Eibishter can achieve anything, so therefore hat der Eibishter mit sein kech v'cholos megale gewinnt zu Moshe Rabbeinu, lecho ani megale tam Parah. It's just that Hashem, with his absolute ability to do anything, chose to reveal to Moshe Rabbeinu the reason behind the Parah Adumah. In spite of the fact that a creation, a human, or an angel for that matter, could never reach this information. So what do we see? Absolutely true to say that this is the ultimate choik. This is a part of Torah that is completely beyond the rational mind. So much so that Shlomo HaMelech couldn't grasp it. Even Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't grasp it on his own accord. But because the Eibishter can do anything, the Eibishter chose to make it accessible to Moshe's mind. Which only raises the question the other way. Okay, logically, if the Eibishter could do anything, then why don't you do that for everybody? Why only for Moshe Rabbeinu? So lefi zeh stellt sich die Scheile, wie bald as Moshe Rabbeinu hat Masse gewinnt dem Tam von Parah Adumah nicht bekoyach atzmai. Once we recognize that Moshe Rabbeinu got to appreciate the reason behind the Parah Adumah, not by his own doing, no, the Eibishter hat es im Megale gewinnt mit sein Kech habilti mugbal, but rather that the Eibishter, who has absolutely no limitations, chose to share it with him in a way that he could comprehend. Hat doch der Eibishter mit demselben Kech kann Megale sein den Tam zu andere. So the Eibishter could have done the same thing for anybody. If it's got nothing to do with the recipient and everything to do with Hashem's absolute infinite ability to share, well, he could have shared with us too. So it seems that there's a reason why the Eibishter doesn't want us to have access to this information. We need to understand that reason. It's the bir in them. Since you do the Pirish and Zois Chukas Ater, nicht Zois Chukas Apora. The fact over here that it says Zois Chukas HaTorah, and it doesn't say this is the chok of the Parah Adumah, like it would have, for example, said with Pesach, right? That says Zois Chukas HaPesach. These are the halachas that relate to Pesach. Over here, we're making a very broad statement, and the statement implies, as the mitzvah from Parah Adumah is HaTorah Keileles HaTorah. That implies that whatever it is about Parah Adumah that makes it unique is reflective on the whole Torah. What does that mean? It means is moving as das was Parah Adumah is klolas ha'teres is mitzad in a chuka vosen sich. The fact that Parah Adumah is called Torah tells you that there's something about Parah Adumah which is indicative of the whole of Torah. What about Parah Adumah? The fact that it's called Chukas. So the choik element, the super rational element of Parah Adumah, is representative of the whole Torah. Now, this is an incredibly important piece of information that every one of us has to remember all the time, because that means that that means that the super rational element that is unique to Parah Adumah is actually the underpinning of the whole of Torah. People tend to think of Torah as a purely rational thing. It's logical, after all. You study Torah, you use your mind in order to grasp it. Therefore, we have to remember this every single day, Zois Chukas HaTorah, that as inexplicable as Parah Adumah is, the essence of Torah is beyond the intellect, not just the human intellect, beyond intellect. What does that mean? So, das is mitzvahs Torah, to Torah allein. This is going to impact our understanding of mitzvahs and of learning Torah itself. It's very clearly been described various times by the Rabbi, in Chassidus generally, that even though we have three categories of mitzvah, mishpatim are absolutely logical, and you should be able to work them out even without the Torah. Eidos are those mitzvahs that once the Torah tells us to do them, they become absolutely clear to us. And chukim are the mitzvahs that are completely super rational. But the essence, this is what Chassidus explains, the essence of even the mitzvah that I can understand in human intellect, the essence of the mitzvah is beyond human intellect. And that's the truth of the mitzvah. It's not just what I can comprehend. In other words, what is a mitzvah? It's It's Hashem's supernal will, which is completely beyond any kind of intellect, not just beyond human intellect. It is beyond any kind of intellect. Now, the Eibeshtar gewollt, as die Ratzim von die Mitzvah soll heraufkommen in Sabish werden Chochma v'Seichel. It's just that Hashem wanted that His super rational, infinite Ratzon, in certain cases, should be reinterpreted into terms that we could understand. Oh, Mishpatim, obviously you don't steal. Oh, Eidos, it makes sense. Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. It makes sense for me to rest on the seventh as well. So the Eibishter allowed us intellectual access. He allowed us intellectual appreciation. But that's not the essence. Why do we keep Shabbos? Because that's what the Eibishter wants at a level that is completely beyond comprehension. Aber euch noch der Islabschus. In Atam Sichli bleibt der Asnem im Husse bipshitus hecher von Asaga. So even once we reach the point that we understand the human capacity of understanding this mitzvah, it doesn't limit the mitzvah to our understanding. The mitzvah is fundamentally beyond logic, beyond the rational. It is fundamentally in the realm of Ratzon. That we know. So we can apply the same principle to Torah learning. Even all of those aspects of Torah that we can understand with human intellect and we appreciate because we understand them, the truth is that the Torah we understand doesn't begin to scratch the surface of what Torah is. Torah is fundamentally beyond our understanding. Is doch moving as geshem shem bechile shum sechel nivra lasig boyroi kachene yoch lasig chachmase und wer steht nel meine kol choy. So what is Torah actually? It's Hashem's wisdom. Just like you cannot understand the Eibishter, you cannot understand the Eibishter's wisdom. So you can understand a layer of revealed wisdom that He has made accessible to us to understand. But the real wisdom, completely beyond us. It's completely obscured from all vision. So that's what we have to know as Jewish people. The mitzvahs that we do because it's Hashem's Ratzon. The Torah that we learn is because it's Hashem's Chochmah. Both of those are intrinsically beyond our reach, but Hashem in His kindness allowed us some element of understanding to make it settle neatly in our experience. So die idea is negei jeden Eden in seiner Avodah von Torah mitzvahs. This is something which is relevant to every one of us in our service of Hashem. Die kim von alle mitzvahs euch von die was haben atam darf sein bederech kabbalas oil. The direct impact on us is that any mitzvah that we do, in spite of the fact that we may understand a value to the mitzvah, we do the mitzvah because the Eibishter said so, with acceptance that it's over our pay grade. So that means, weil is gewend der Zivui von Eibishter gesagt, gesagt ich chokakti, und sie ist der Nusach von alle Birchas HaMitzvahs wird sie wohnen. Why do we do mitzvahs? Because Hashem said so. It's a choik. I don't have to understand it to motivate me to do it. Vetzivonu. That's what we say in the bracha of a mitzvah. That's what Hashem told me to do. I do it. So this is very, very important information as a Jewish person to understand that it's a bonus to understand what I'm doing or what I'm learning. But the essence of what I'm doing and learning is completely beyond me, and I have to accept it whether I get it or not. This applies to Torah learning, and in a sense, even more than to mitzvahs. At the end of the day, Torah is infinite. It's Hashem's wisdom, so it's completely infinite. Therefore, whatever I learn, actually, there's an infinite amount that I haven't begun to learn on this particular subject. Not only is there an infinite amount of other subjects I haven't touched, this subject that I'm learning, there's an infinite amount that I haven't begun to even recognize. So therefore, whatever learning I've done, just like I have Kabbalah's oil to do mitzvahs, whether I appreciate why I need to do them or not, I have to keep learning whether I appreciate why I have to keep digging further into the subject. As das, was ist beim Gewinn Besitz, L'mayla me'asaga, soll das kennen benehmen mit seinem Verstand. And the process has to be that there's a degree of this Torah learning which remains currently beyond my understanding. Now I have to work to understand it. And when I understand that, then I'll acknowledge that there's another layer beyond my understanding, and I'm going to have to work to understand that. Und in der Chukas Torah soll bei ihm sein in hechere Inyonim, bis es zukommen zu mit der Chukas von Torah, as sie ist L'mayla miget der Hasaga. And you keep going and going and going deeper and deeper until you think you've mastered what you could never have understood, and then you realize there's more, and you master that until eventually you reach a point where you recognize the true Ein Sofios of Torah, the real beyond comprehension of Torah. On the Rabbi sagt der Pasuk says Chukas ha Torah. That's why when we're introduced to the Parah Adumah, which is the template for this understanding of the whole of Judaism, we're not told about the inexplicable law of the Parah Adumah. We're told about the inexplicable nature of the whole of Torah. Even though, as we've mentioned, there are many areas of Torah that have entered the human reach and realm and intellectual grasp, yet we have to be absolutely clear that we know that every one of those elements of Torah that we understand is fundamentally in its essence beyond our understanding. It's a chukah. Not only is it a relative chukah, that there's another dimension to Torah that's more than I understand now. So there's the inexplicable part relative to me. No, it's like the Parah Adumah, fundamentally beyond comprehension. This is what a Jew has to know. Mitzvahs, Torah are fundamentally beyond my comprehension, so my dedication to them is a dedication to Hashem, not a satisfaction of what I appreciate and understand. If that's the truth of the whole of Torah, that it is really, really beyond comprehension, then I have to have at least one part of Torah that retains that nature to remind me. And that will remind me that all the other parts of Torah, even though they appear to be packaged for human consumption, are fundamentally beyond. Und der Pfarrer des Eibishter nicht megale gewinnt zu Eden. That's why, even though of course the Eibishter could have revealed Tam Parah to everybody, but he didn't, so we would always have an anchor to our Judaism. Just like this part of Yiddishkeit will never begin to plumb its depth, will never begin to understand it, so I should appreciate that's actually true for the whole of the Jewish experience, Torah and mitzvahs. If every part of Torah had become accessible to us, and every part of Torah we could satisfy ourselves with saying, oh, that makes sense. It's nice if demos gefällt in first thing that would have happened is we would never have had the experience of I need to do this because it's what Hashem wants, because we'd always have the satisfaction of I need to do this because it actually works and makes sense to me. But besides that, let's say that we confronted an area of our Yiddishkeit that needed us to be willing to sacrifice, and sacrifice is to step out of yourself and out of your intellectual mind that tries to justify why you should be able to sidestep this particular sacrifice. Nobody would be able to have Mesiras Nefesh. Because the entire experience of Judaism would have all been rational. That's what it would have guided a person's behavior within Torah always. Does it make sense? This would have infected and affected so many areas of Yiddishkeit, not only when there's a crisis and I actually have to have Mesiras Nefesh, but generally, because anytime a person has to do something which they don't resonate with intellectually, that requires Mesiras Nefesh. Now, there might be various parts of Yiddishkeit that any one of us could say, I don't really get this. I don't really appreciate this. And then we would need some degree of Mesiras Nefesh, and it would be impossible because our whole Judaism would have been built only on what makes sense to us. In fact, a person who gets caught up in a Judaism constructed only on what makes sense to them and resonates with them could fall into the trap of what the Ramban calls a person who lives a disgusting kind of behavior with so-called Torah authority. In other words, they can justify their behavior according to Torah. Why? Because it all makes sense to me. What any person who only sees Judaism purely through an intellectual lens, it all is rational, it all makes sense, that's the person who is capable of justifying the most horrific behavior, because look, I found support for it in Torah. That's talking about behavior. The same applies to actually learning and comprehending the Torah. Was ist doch nicht ausgerechnet auf die Seichel, Herr von seiner Sage, darf sein ja Geiter. In order for a person to reach the part of Torah that they could never have imagined reaching, that's what we call matzasa. Just like you walk down the street, you don't imagine you're going to find money lying on the side of the road. If you do, it's a surprise. That's matzasa, that's a metzia. So in order for a person to gain understanding of the part of Torah that they would never have anticipated understanding, they need yigiyah. They need to push themselves in a way that is difficult, more than I would have expected. Amelim bat Torah, as the expression goes. To toil in Torah. As long as a person is willing to satisfy themselves with, hey, it makes sense to me, I'm happy, I've understood this, why would they push any further? Why would they toil? If you don't toil, you don't really get to the depth of Torah. So both for observance of mitzvahs and for real learning of Torah, a person needs to have an element of Kabbalah Soul / Mesiras Nefesh. In order to get that, I have to know somewhere in my Yiddishkeit that Torah is not just about what makes sense and is comfortable for me. It's dafka when a person pushes himself to learn more than what is comfortable, whether that mean more time or more depth or more repetition, or whether it means going against the nature of your mind. So I'm a rational person, I don't want to learn all that mystical stuff. I'm an esoteric person, I don't want to learn all that halacha stuff. Then a person can reach matzasa, the real understanding of Torah, which actually is not just beyond, but even counterintuitive. Like, for example, we often discuss that the difference between Talmud Bavli and the advantage that it has over Talmud Yerushalmi is how much you have to work, because things are not clear, and there's much debate, and things are left hanging, and you have to try and work it all out. That's actually where you get the real depth. So das alles ist shaykh nur wenn in Torah is da begila an Indian, was es hechel gamer fun geder asechel. So the only way that a person would have the capacity for this kind of dedication to do mitzvahs that I don't understand, with Kabbalah Soul and even Mesiras Nefesh, and to learn Torah in a way that isn't necessarily comfortable for me, and really pushing myself. The only way I'd get there is if I'm conscious of the fact that at least one part of Torah reminds me that Torah is fundamentally chukah. It's fundamentally beyond human consumption. The fact that I have that one element of Torah reminds me that is the nature of the whole Jewish experience. A reminder that whatever I understand, there's still way, way more that I don't understand. And that will allow the person to express your gaita, putting aside what I care and what I think and what I appreciate, and instead doing what I'm required to do, to really put in the effort. Until eventually a person can reach the ultimate state of Torah, which is the ultimate knowledge, to recognize that you cannot know, to recognize that Torah is fundamentally beyond comprehension. Okay, so now we understand it. It's not that Moshe was withholding information from the Yidden. The Eibishter decided to share it with Moshe. The Eibishter decided not to share it with Yidden. Why? So we'll all have this element of Chukas HaTorah, which will guide our entire experience of Judaism, that Judaism should not be bespoke to my personal needs and feelings and understanding, but rather should be open to this absolute dedication to Hashem, to push myself beyond myself, because that's what Yiddishkeit really is. So what's the obvious question? Why then tell Moshe Rabbeinu? What, does Moshe Rabbeinu not need this element? So now the question is the other way. Seeing as the Eibishter did reveal the reason, the logic behind Parah Adumah, is if now after Chaiskum as Moshe Rabbeinu hat chas v'shalom gefällt in der Messias Nefesh b'kiyam mitzvahs und die Shleimus Haygia in Limud HaTorah. So does that then imply, God forbid, that Moshe Rabbeinu does not have the ultimate level of dedication to mitzvahs because he understands them all, and the ultimate dedication to learning Torah, pushing and pushing beyond what you understand because he understands it all? Could it be that Moshe Rabbeinu should lose out, chas v'shalom, on what the whole chap of Judaism is because Hashem revealed information to him? Aber klar, wie ist scheich zu sagen, dass durch dem, was der Eibishter hat, es megalig, wenn es Moshe Rabbeinu soll sich bei Moshe empfehlen, als seinen Ikrin Avodas HaTorah und Mitzvahs? How actually is it possible to suggest that the Eibishter created a scenario where for Moshe Rabbeinu he would lack what is apparently a very critical part of Judaism, the sense of the unknown, the sense of the super-rational? How is it possible? So in order to understand this, we first have to analyze how the Medrash describes Moshe Rabbeinu's reaction to hearing that there is such a thing as Tumas Meis. Als wenn Moshe Rabbeinu hat gehört wegen Tumas Meis, hat gefragt, weil dem Eibishter ihm nicht mehr selber Matei Tarasai. So when Moshe Rabbeinu heard of the Tumas Meis, he says to the Eibishter, if this is such a severe Tumah, how will this person ever be purified ever again? Lo yashiva, the Eibishter didn't immediately reply. But he says, Shon is karkram upon Moshe, says the Medrash, at that time Moshe's face went dark. Und viele, wenn der Eibishter hat ihm nach dem gesagt, as Taras is al develokal atomim afas seifas achatos, says the Medrash, even later, when Hashem explained the Parah Adumah, and that's how you purify a person, hat gefragt bei dem Eibishter, b'chitaroi? So the Moshe Rabbeinu said, and that's it? That's the whole thing? That's how you reverse this horrific tumah of Tumas Meis? So that's how the Medrash describes it. We have to understand what was bothering Moshe so much, and why was he so dissatisfied with the response. Darf man verstehen. Seien doch voran Tumois, was bechamen protim ikrim, seinen sie harbe von Tumas Meis. The truth is that there are other kinds of Tumah which in certain respects seem to be even worse than Tumas Meis. For example, wie Tumas Zov und Metzera. Tmei Meis tat sich nicht gefunden, bloß machne Schchine. So, a person who is impure from contamination from a dead body is not allowed in the Mishkan or the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, the immediate precinct of the Shechina itself. But it could be in Machne Levir, which is basically the Azara in the Beis Hamikdash. It could be there. In other words, it's not complete cessation from holy connection. Whereas a person who's a Zov has to be outside of the Machne Levir, cannot be anywhere in the precinct of holiness. Worse than that is somebody with tzaras who gets sent right outside of the whole camp. So, in a certain regard, they seem worse than the Tumas Meis. Also, by Zov und Metzeres Tumah Yotze Alein Migufon, Mashen Atmei Meis, was die Tumah kommt von Onen Ames ve'oid. Whereas, he has another difference. A Zov and a Metzora is impurity inside their own biology. Whereas Tmei Meis means just somebody was in touch with something impure. Surely that's not as bad. So was hat Moshe Rabbeinu dafka bei Tumas Mes sich gewundert, business karkem uponov, wie ken torvern. So why is it that dafka bei Tumas Mes, that's when Moshe Rabbeinu was so shocked to the point that it actually changed his features? How could you become purified? What do you mean? You could purify somebody who has biological impurity. Surely you could purify somebody who has been in touch with impurity. Or nicht bei anderer halber Tumas befragt sein doch gewinn frier. How come he never raised this question earlier? The other tumas were introduced earlier, and they have such horrible impact. Why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu raise the question then? So in order to understand this, we need to appreciate that tumas meis is more than just the fact that here is somebody who was in contact with a dead body. There's a fundamental principle about a dead body that is objectionable to Judaism, and Moshe Rabbeinu found very difficult to swallow. What is that? So the bir boze. Alle andere tumas bei Iden seien verbunden mit der lebendige Guf von Aiden. Any other tumah, including tsaras and including a zav, the human who has the tumah is still alive. And therefore, it's a guf asatan sich an neshama. We're talking about a human physical body, but it is with a neshama inside it that keeps it going. On the far is a feel when the guf is tummy geworden, wie baldobes gefindt sich in a neshama was is chelek lekami mal mamish. So yes, the body might be impure, but who's living inside that body? And a neshama that is chelek lekami mal mamish und ebishtes hakol yochol, which means that there's a piece of Hashem who is totally infinite and capable of everything, omnipotent. Can verstehen, as the kerch von der neshama hat milchatchil den kerch zu peil sein auf der tumah. It's logical to assume that the neshama is powerful enough that at some point, in some way, it will override the tumah and get rid of it. As the gufs that will follow a particular process, like immersion in a mikveh, and that would allow the neshama to retake control over the body and push out the impurity and revert to a state of holiness. Why? Because there's a neshama there to assist. But when you talk about a dead body, the reason this body is impure is because of the absence of the neshama, because it's not alive. And it's aufgeteilt from the neshama. There's a separation between body and soul. And the body has no power to overcome impurity. What's the body? It's from dust to dust. That's what it is. Do is given the Shaila Moshe, and that's Moshe's question. How can you purify that body or whatever has been in touch with that body from that impurity? The only reason that there is this impurity is because there's been a breakdown between godliness, holiness, and this body. How do you cure that? Meila other tumas, the neshama is still there, the holiness is still there. Here, the whole tumah comes from the fact that there is no holiness. Let's take this deeper. The inyan von tumah is nicht ein tit v'chayotz b'ze gashmi was it darf es obwaschen. We can understand very clearly that tumah is not some kind of soil or stain on the human body that you wash off with soap. We understand that tumah is a spiritual contamination that blocks connection between the person and Hashem. It's that connection that we have to Hashem via Torah and mitzvahs, a ruchnistika soul connection. That's what keeps us truly alive, as the pasuk says. Aber wenn fällt durch Achmanet an Chet ve'oven, Chas v'shalom, a Jew succumbs to doing an aver. Wird durch dem abgeschwacht, die Dveikus und Chaim von innen, und wird tame. That weakens the life, the true life of the Jew, and therefore the Jew becomes tame. Und in dem seinen Tag kame v'chame bechinos inem gedelat tumah. Now, if that's the general principle of tumah, we understand that there are various levels and various degrees of impurity. The different kind of tumah will be a symptom of or related to the different degree of weakness of connection between the person and Hashem. Was bleibt noch verbunden mit den Nebischen und Torah Mitzvahs, is moving as hat im Kerch zu werden Tor zu verstärken seine Wege mit Torah Mitzvahs bis in Ashlemus. So as long as the person still retains some connection to Hashem through Torah and Mitzvahs, even if right now that connection has been weakened, it can be strengthened. So the person is still alive, the person is still engaged with Torah mitzvahs. Ramp up your Torah mitzvahs, bolster your connection, and you'll come to life again. But what happens if a person does something which is so radical that they sever their spiritual connection? They cut themselves off from chayim beruchnis, from spiritual life. What happens if that spiritual death is the direct cause of physical death? God forbid. There is the concept of tumas meis. That means that there is a complete cutoff between the person and elikus, between the person and holiness. On the far is niskarkrum ponav shel Moshe. That's why Moshe goes colors. Wie kann sein die Teile von atmei meis? Von Atuma was kommt durch und von Aguf meis, warum die Neshama atzme ist doch afile b'shas achet oisabam neitoi, welche ist geworden in ganzen abgerissen von elikus und Torah mitzvahs. Moshe Rabbeinu says, how do you ever fix this? The neshama, we get it. The neshama was never affected. Even in the worst averos, the neshama remains absolutely loyal to Hashem. But this is the body we're talking about that has now lost all of its connection. How can you come back from that? How can you heal that? That's Moshe Rabbeinu's big question. Complete severance from godliness seems like it is a one-way ticket. So to respond to that, that's why Hashem says to him, Chukas das is the keach von Torah. That's the power of Torah. Torah doesn't have to make sense. Yes, you're facing a problem over here that makes no sense. How do you reconstruct a connection of holiness where the connection has been completely obliterated? That's the power of Torah. Torah doesn't have to be locked into what makes sense. Even in a scenario where a person's physical self has become completely detached from the spiritual self, completely disconnected from Torah mitzvahs, the fact that there was a neshama in this body, and the neshama utilized this body as its way to perform mitzvahs and to learn Torah, the neshama, which has an eternal component to it because it's a part of Hashem, when put together with the power of Torah, which is also eternal, that has the possibility to peil sein in dem guf. Together they can impact the body to have a lasting effect of the neshama, even though the neshama is no longer in the body. Or später, when the guf is abgesondert von der neshama, even later, once the body and soul have lost their direct connection, the impact of the neshama plus Torah can even affect the body after the neshama has left. And therefore it's possible to purify even the impurity that came from such a terrible spiritual circumstance, detachment of body and soul. Actually, this would explain, at least on a spiritual level, why it is that the Gemara tells us that a tzaddik doesn't make you tameh. So if a person goes within proximity of a tzaddik who has passed, the person does not become tameh. Because in the case of a tzaddik, there is no distinction between neshama and body. Like the Alter Rebbe famously says in Tanya, that the life of a tzaddik is the neshama. It is the avas Hashem. It is the emunah. And that's what keeps their body alive. Even if the neshama has now moved on and is no longer physically in the body, because the real life of the tzaddik is complete ruchnis and connection to Hashem, therefore that remains indelibly part of the body. That, the Eibishter says very clearly, this is something which is completely beyond comprehension. You cannot explain it, you cannot justify it, that's how it is. Why? Because logic says that two things can only affect each other as long as they're connected to each other. It's illogical that something should have an influence over another item if it has no connection to it, and in fact they're now at loggerheads. This one is dead, physical, detached from Torah mitzvahs. This is alive, spiritual, and living Torah mitzvahs. So logically, they should have nothing to do with each other. That's the chukah. That's the part that doesn't make any sense. How could it be? Well, das ist nur mitzad kecha berev, was ist heche von alle agdoros nagboles. That's because the Eibusha can do anything. So Moshe Rabbeinu is wondering, how can you ever repair the loss of connection of a person who's gone so far from the Torah and mitzvahs that when their body loses the neshama, it actually loses any value of the neshama? So the Eibusha says, I can do anything. And I can take the nitzchis element of the neshama that used that body to perform at least some mitzvah somewhere along the way, and couple it together with the nitzchis power of Torah, and we now have a way to create Tahara. Now, with that information, we can appreciate how come it is that the Eibusha revealed the secret behind the Parah Adumah to Moshe Rabbeinu, and it didn't in any way impact Moshe Rabbeinu's commitment to Torah, that it should be weakened, chas v'shana. In fact, not only does this not weaken Moshe Rabbeinu's resolve and commitment to Torah and mitzvahs, as it may have done for any of us. If we'd know what everything means, we might lack the capacity for Mesiras Nefesh. If you know who Moshe Rabbeinu is, it does the exact opposite for him because of who he is. Moshe Rabbeinu, as we know, is the archetype of Chokhmah. He is the personification of absolute Chokhmah d'Atzilus, divine wisdom. Which means, was mitzad dem bittul von Chokhmah is in Sheireh Ein Sof Baruch Hu. That means that Moshe Rabbeinu has the absolute bittul which Chokhmah d'Atzilus has, making him a vehicle for Ein Sof, for Hashem's infinite self. As the Alter Rebbe says in Sha'ar Yichud V'Emunah, that the Eibishter is the absolute truth, the absolute oneness, and that is experienced at the level of Chokhmah. Okay, so what are we saying? Because Moshe Rabbeinu is the element of Chokhmah, he is open to Ein Sof. So even with this information, he retains absolute bittul, because that's who he is. He is bittul, not like we who have to learn bittul, and we have to learn Mesiras Nefesh. Moshe Rabbeinu is bittul. In fact, when you look in the language of Kabbalah, you can actually see that we say that Pnimius Abba, the inner reality of Chokhmah, is absolute one with Pnimius Atik. So, Pnimius Abba hu Pnimius Atik mamash. The inner reality of Abba, which is the Partzuf of Chokhmah. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu's reality, which is absolute Chokhmah. What is it? Not only does it connect to a higher level, Keser, but it is fundamentally in its essence Pnimius Atik, the deepest level of godliness. One way to explain it is this. Generally speaking, when a higher divine state has an impact on a lower divine state, it's what we call mashpia mekabel. The higher state is in an empowered position, the lower state is in a disempowered position, and so you get the flow, so to speak, from the have to the have-not. The higher gives to the lower. And logic tells you that anytime you have something that is the higher, the have, and it shares with the lower, the have-not, it only shares a fraction. Like the teacher who only shares some of his knowledge with his students. Yet when we talk about the inner reality of Chokhmah, Pnimius Abba, that we say has within it Pnimius Atik, it's not receiving from Pnimius Atik. It's not that Chokhmah opens it up and then can receive this great infinite dimension of godliness, but rather that it discovers within itself that dimension. But das meint Atzma Sein Sof, meaning that Pnimius Abba can discover within itself Hashem's actual infinite essence. Nicht in Eufen von am Shacha b'derech mashpia mekabel, no Pnimius Abba is Pnimius Atzmus derfun. It means that there is no flow from Atik to Chokhmah. It's rather a discovery that Chokhmah has that fundamentally, in my essence, I am Pnimius Atik. I am Atzmus. The essence of Hashem reflects in my essence. Now you can understand how Hashem says, to you I will reveal, not teach, I will reveal the reason of the Parah Adumah. It's not information. Hashem's not giving Moshe Rabbeinu information that he's not giving anybody else. He is revealing within Moshe, you, Pnimius Abba, you are this inyan of Chukah. Meaning, Zois Chukas HaPorah, or as we say, Zois Chukas HaTorah, means that there is an element of Yiddishkeit that is beyond understanding. And there's an element that is beyond the rules that say if there's a detachment between neshama and body, that you can never put them back together again. There's an element beyond all of that. Moshe Rabbeinu, that is you. It's not something I have to teach you. It's something you have to discover within yourself. And that will actually explain why it is that which is the area of Torah within which Hashem reveals this aspect of Chukah, both the Chukah of Torah and the Chukah of Moshe Rabbeinu himself, dafka by something to do with Tumah and Tara, and not just any Tumah and Tara, but specifically death. Why? Pshas der Ashpaz in an Eifen vom Mashpia Makabel is vibald, kommt bederach Yidi devam Shacha und Sevet, nimshach Blaze ha'ara. The Rabbi is the Shaykh Zera no Beis Ashpa. If I'm talking about a higher dimension, giving influence or inspiration to a lower dimension, so as we've already described, it is a Yerida. Number one, it is only a fraction of what the host has to share, and now we're learning something else. It only operates as long as there is a connection. So the student only learns from the teacher as long as the teacher is teaching. Nicht später, not afterwards. Because the fundamental reality of Mashpia and Mekabel is that they are two distinct entities. And after the Mashpia walks away, the Mekabel remains a Mekabel. But when you have a connection, that is not hamshacha from one to the other. It's not yerida, a degrading. It's not ha'ara, a fraction of the sharing. Rather, but when you're revealing the real essence, as is the experience of Pnimius Abba, as is the experience of Moshe Rabbeinu, that he gets the essence of Hashem revealed to him from within, then ist nicht scheich zu sagen, dass der oft ist noch beis am Schochen bleibt noch a besondere Metzius von dem Kabel dort wo sie da am Schochen Satzmus wird es Mahus Satzmus von Elikos. You can't now say that when you reveal that the essence of something, in this case Moshe Rabbeinu, in this case Pnimius Abba, that the essence of it is the essence of Hashem. You can't say that's only while we're revealing it, and then when we stop revealing it, it's no longer the case and you become an independent person again, because it's not sharing, it's not downloading, it's not giving, it's not teaching, it's exposing your truth. When you expose your truth, it is always. The Mele is moving. Vies can sein die Tara von Thomas Mess, which will help us to understand how you purify somebody from being contaminated by the impurity of death. Agamas begoloi is the guf nit verbunden mit dem Kerch von Elikus von den Neshama und Torah mitzvahs. Yes, to the naked eye, I see a breakdown. There is no longer a Neshama in this body, which means there's no longer a connection between the Neshama and the body. That's what I see with my eyes. But what I'm not seeing is that be'etzem, the body is fundamentally holy. It has the kedusha of Elikus in it, and it even has the kedusha of the neshama in it. Nowadays we don't see this. Because today, in the Golus world, the essence of Hashem is not revealed through our bodies. So therefore, today, because we don't see the essence of Hashem in the human body, that's why there's a possibility of Tumah when that body loses its soul. And a requirement for Tara, which requires something beyond explanation, Chukah, because in our mind, in our eyes, we don't see how it could all come back together. That's now. But when, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? We're going to see that the Yesh HaNivra is one with the Yesh HaAmiti. We're going to see that actually Hashem's essence radiate right through our bodies. That our bodies are holy. Then you'll be able to see that the real truth of the body is the neshama that it contains. Over Mele wird nicht sein, the ganze von Tumas Mes. Therefore, in the time of Mashiach, there's no concept of Tumas Mes. Why? Because Tumas Mes is a breakdown between neshama and body, and at that time there'll be no breakdown. And the Chukas Taras wird demut in Skala werden zu jeden einem, and then everybody will be able to understand the Chukas Atara. Not understand it, we'll see it, we'll experience it. It won't be something you get explained in a book. You'll actually see that this is the reality. Is need given consider as durch dem so bei Moshe Rabbeinu chas v'shalom fellen in shleimus habit of Mesiras Nefesh, and now it's absolutely clear that Moshe Rabbeinu being exposed to this information is not in any way going to downgrade his commitment to Torah mitzvahs or his ability for Mesiras Nefesh, if anything, to the contrary. The time part of us is gal given to Moshe is not tam sichli. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't given intellectual property that nobody else had. Was is nislabish geworden in Seichel, which he then would have grasped in his mind and experienced in his mind. Das ist beim Nisgale geworden besichle der Ratzen Elin von Atzmus and Seif bis as das geworden sein euch dem Seichels Metzias. What happened is, at this time Hashem reveals to him the essence of Hashem as part of him. Now, he's not going to make less Mesiras Nefesh. This is now who I really am. I am an expression of Atzmus. It's doch adera, but to the contrary. Who could possibly be weak in the area of Mesiras Nefesh, lack Mesiras Nefesh? Only a person who feels independent of Hashem, so maybe they won't be so dedicated. That person will have to work hard to have Mesiras Nefesh because he feels distinct. That person will have to work hard in order to learn Torah properly because he feels independent. But Moshe Rabbeinu, who now recognizes that his whole being is Elikus, now his whole being is Mesiras Nefesh. It's no challenge, it's no effort, it is him. And that's why you'll always find that Parshas Chukas is read in the proximity of the Chag HaGula of the Frierdiker Rebbe Yud Beis Gimel Tammuz. Why? The Baal HaSimcha v'HaGula is given durch mit the avodah for Mesiras Nefesh befoyal. The Frierdiker Rebbe was completely one with the avodah of Mesiras Nefesh. It wasn't something he had to work on or to do. Aber fraten der Arbeit von Abot Sater in jener Medina, was is given the Meiser, especially in the work of spreading Torah in communist Russia, where he was imprisoned. Was hat sich nicht gefordert, Mesiras Nefesh befehl bei jedem Indien, von Jonim hat sich gefordert, Mesiras Nefesh befehl bei jedem Indien, von Jonim Klolim bis zum glänzenden Prat von Torah Mitzvahs. Every single breathing moment in Russia required Mesiras Nefesh. It wasn't something he had to work on doing. That's what he did, constantly, 24/7. Und der Rebbe ist die Gula von der Meise gewinnen an Öfen, als zusammen damit, was sie gewinnen as Golish und meine mehr Teva, ist das gewinnen Lubish in Teva. And that's why the nature of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Geula was, of course, miraculous, and yet it appeared to go through natural channels. Why is that relevant to this conversation? Well, there's various ways that the world runs. Nature, supernature, and supernature hidden in nature. There are various ways that the Eibusher runs the world. First of all, there's Anoga Tivis, was nimmt sich von Shem Elokim Gematria Teva. The first reality is the natural reality, powered by the name Elokim, which has the Gematria Teva. Die Madrege Elikus was in Meluvish in Olam, und mitzad Neir hot Welt hat Tfisis Mokim, Bechidas Memale Kolomin. This is a reality where the world is real. In other words, this is a reality where Hashem considers the needs of the world, the seasons, economies, the nature of health, politics, whatever it is. That's Memale Kol Olmin, the Eibusher gearing into the world, seeing things through the world's perspective. Like a parent who gets down on all fours to play with a child and sees the world from the child's eyes. Then you have Anoga Nisis, you have miracles. Miracles smash the rules of nature, override nature, and that stems from Shem Havaya, which is beyond the constriction of nature. This is the dimension of godliness which is completely beyond the world. Seviv Kol Almin. Everything that happens to the world is of equally meaningless consequence to him. Because we're dealing with a dimension of godliness that is beyond the world, so it smashes the rules of the world in order to operate. And then you get Nisim Vasanim Luvish in Teva. You get miracles that play out through natural means. Was kommt von noch a hechere madregen elikus. That derives from a level of godliness that is even higher than Shem Havaya, even higher than Sefer Kolomi. Was hecher Sefer Shem Elikim, Sefer Shem Havaya. Und der Rebbe werden von dort nimmt nicht was werden sein ist a hecher von Teva, aber es ist eine angetan in Levusha Teva. Because it's such a high level of elikus, it can have the paradox of being beyond nature and natural all at once. Das heißt, as the Nes peilt eichif mit Sis HaTeva, as Teva Guf is maskim eif Nes, which means that the impact on the natural world is so profound that the natural world conforms to the miracle. Normal miracles have to break the natural world in order to happen, and these are miracles that get the natural world on board. Like Purim is a great example, massive miracle, all through human channels. The king happened to marry a Jewish woman, Mordechai happened to save his life, Haman had already made him suspicious, he's the same king who provoked the anti-Semitism in the first place, signed off on Haman's decrees, and now he is the Dafka, the one who turns around. Nature itself is maskim to the miracle. It's the same style of miracle that happened for the Gula of the Frierdiker Rebbe. As dieselbe Menschen, was haben geheißen hem arrestieren, sie allein haben gemusst heißen hem befreien. The same people who chose that the Frierdiker Rebbe should be arrested, they were the ones who had to sign off on his release. The Teva had to be maskim to the Nes. That is very much the concept that we've described about Moshe Rabbeinu, where it's not that you have to be mashpia, you have to come into an environment and influence the environment to change, but you reveal that the environment is elikus. Moshe Rabbeinu, you are elikus, you are the Chukas HaTorah. You don't have to learn the Chukas HaTorah. The thing is that with the Frierdiker Rebbe, he brought this reality into existence. Because of the way the Frierdiker Rebbe served with absolute Mesiras Nefesh, he revealed within the world Pnimius Atik. He didn't break the natural order in order to succeed. Now, das Gufa is given the Metzius von Teva, as yet Messiah given to Kedusha, he did, like the concept of Pnimius Abba is Pnimius Atik. The Frierdiker Rebbe revealed in this world of the communist machine, he revealed the hand of the Eibishter, which is an incredibly profound kind of miracle. It's Chukas, it's completely beyond anything that you could understand or expect, but that's ultimately exactly what Yiddishkeit is all about. Not to fight our enemies and overcome them, but to reveal the Kedusha within the world so that our enemies have to be maskim to the truth of Hashem Echad. You should see that in the whole world. Take it from me, Yad Mamash.